Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks, and today is Tuesday, so it's Tag Tuesday. We're going to be doing a tag about Stephen King. That is the King of Horror Stephen King tag. This tag was originally created by Jess Book Girl TV. Thank you so much for the tag, Jess. I'm looking forward to getting into it. I am not actually the biggest reader of Stephen King. I have read some of his books, but I don't think I've even read a third of the books that he's published. So I'm really curious to see how I do with these questions. Question 1, how did you get into reading Stephen King? Well, I actually got into Stephen King because when I was younger, I found a compilation of books by him, but they were under his pen name, Richard Bachman. And I remember reading a couple of those stories and being really engaged with like the horror and the intense feelings that I felt when reading them. And that kind of caused me to like further delve into some of Stephen King's writing as well. I also remember seeing a movie of one of his books when I was younger, and that really stuck with me. And kind of later in life, as I've gotten more and more back into reading, was like, oh yeah, I remember being really creeped out by this particular movie. Maybe I should try reading some of his books. Question 2, what was the first Stephen King book that you read? The first Stephen King book that I read was The Long Walk, and again, this was published under the Richard Bachman pen name. Question 3, have you read a Stephen King book that was published in the year you were born? So I was born in the end of the 1900s, in 1988 to be exact, and it was a quiet year for Stephen King. The only thing that he published that year was Nightmares in the Sky, and that looks to be a novella. I have not read it, and I'm not familiar with it at all, although now that I know that it was published on my birth year, maybe I'll go check it out. Question 4, do you prefer to collect his books in paperback or hardback? Does it matter? So I don't actually collect Stephen King books, so it doesn't really matter to me in particular. I do have a general rule in my house that if I'm going to keep a book on my bookshelves, it has to be a nice hardcover edition. So that would apply to a Stephen King book as well. If I read something that I really loved and wanted to keep a copy of, it would have to be a hardback. Question 5, how many of his books are on your bookshelf? I believe at this moment I have 3 Stephen King books on my bookshelves. I know I have Insomnia, and I think I have a book that's called Stranger Things or something like that. And there's one more that I can't quite recall the title of at the moment. The reason that I know they're there is because periodically I reorganize my bookshelves and then I pick those up going, man, these are some meaty books, I really need to get to them, and then they go back on the bookshelves. Question number 6, Stephen King is known for long and gory novels. Which of his novels was tough for you to read? I actually am not super affected by blood and gore. I don't always love reading bloody and gory books, but it doesn't really freak me out in the same way that psychological horror does. So his book Misery for me was probably much tougher, even though it was a lot less gory. And particularly after like my early 20s, I think that one really gave me the heebie-jeebies. And that's because, spoiler alert, just in case you haven't seen or read Misery, there is one particular scene where someone's legs are broken to keep them from running away. And I suffered a really bad tibial plateau fracture in my early 20s racing motorcycles. And knowing what that pain feels like and how excruciating it is, that scene where his legs are broken, it just, oh my gosh, it makes me have empathy pains, if that makes sense. Question 7, have you DNF'd a Stephen King book? At this point in time, I have not ever DNF'd a Stephen King book, but that's not to say that I wouldn't. Question 8, have you read his books in publication order? I think we've already established that I haven't read that many Stephen King books, so I have definitely not read them in publication order. In fact, I think I've read more of his more recent books and only a couple of his really old books. Question number 9, which Stephen King books would you like to read that you haven't read yet? There are quite a few that I would like to read. I would definitely like to knock Insomnia off my shelf. I know that's sitting over here somewhere. I know my mom's favorite Stephen King book is A Date. I can't remember what the exact date is. I know it starts with 11, but I think that's like kind of a time travel sort of a book. That one sounds really interesting to me. I also know that Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads and Bad from Bad as Rad are hosting a Stephen King read-along over the next 6 months. They're reading like a whole series of books, 1 book per month. So I might actually join in on that. And I've also heard really good things about his Dark Tower series, which I would be interested in checking out. Really, I guess any book that I haven't read by him, I'd be interested in reading potentially. Question 10, name a book that he's written that other people liked, but you didn't. So I'm afraid to say that I don't really care for many of the Stephen King classics. It, Kujo, Carrie, none of those are appealing to me, neither in book or movie format. I remember seeing Carrie as a young child and just being like, this is so stupid. Yeah, they're just not really my vibe. For horror, I definitely prefer like a much more psychological horror, and for me, those ones just, for whatever reason, don't really do it. Question number 11, name a book of his that you think is underrated. So I'm gonna go ahead and go with The Long Walk. under his pen name, Richard Bachman. That was probably one of like the most haunting books I think I've ever read. The premise of it is that you have a bunch of young boys that are forced into a competition where they just walk until they drop dead. And this continues on until there is only one boy standing. And this was pre-Hunger Games. This was pre like all of the dystopian fics where you have children fighting for their lives. And the thing I think that is so interesting about this is that these kids aren't really fighting each other for their lives. They're just walking. And it takes something that's such a benign activity and gives it such a sinister flair. For me, that was a really haunting, remarkable book, and I wish it got more attention. Question 12, which Stephen King characters would you like to have dinner with? So I don't know if I want to have dinner with any of his characters from his books, but I would love to have dinner with Jack Nicholson, who played one of the main characters in The Shining in the movie. I thought he did such a remarkable acting job that I would love to ask him questions about that role, how he got into like that madness, and I think that would be a really, really interesting meal. Question 13, did Stephen King inspire you to start reading or writing? No, I was not inspired by Stephen King to read or to write. I started reading when I was very, very young, and reading Stephen King at that age would have been like highly inappropriate. And in terms of writing, when I wrote when I was younger, I was actually really inspired by the fantasy genre, not so much the horror genre. That's not to say that, you know, I couldn't potentially be inspired by him to write something down the road, but definitely thus far, he has not been an inspiration. Question 14, if you were to meet Stephen King, what would you say? I think if we were gonna have like an actual conversation where I had time to ask him questions, I would wanna know how he churns out so many high quality books like for so many years now. It is remarkable to see like the frequency that he publishes books at. And I wonder if he has like a team of writers that helps him do that, because I can't imagine just like doing one book a year or 2 books a year. It's pretty remarkable. And I think I would also ask him like where he comes up with his ideas. It's not like he writes the same exact idea over and over again. I mean, he has a lot of really unique concepts. And I think that that's a pretty spectacular thing. Question 15, have you ever been to Bangor, Maine? So I've been to 33 states so far, and Maine is not one of them. There's a handful of states up in like the Northeast that I haven't been to yet, and Maine is on that list. In terms of Stephen King like made famous locations, the only place that I've been is outside of Denver. I have been to the hotel where The Shining was shot, or was the inspiration for The Shining. That was pretty interesting. I went earlier this year when I was visiting my uncle. I actually have a video vlog of that vacation, including scenes from that hotel. You can see that up here if you're interested in checking it out. It was a really beautiful hotel. For me, I didn't really personally feel like it was very creepy at all, although they say it is America's most haunted location. I personally didn't have any supernatural experiences. I did really enjoy the scenery of the mountains and just the general vibe of the place. I thought it was really cool. So that would be my one Stephen King related location. Question 16, which do you prefer, his books or his movies? Typically, I am a fan of books. I will say that there is one exception to that rule, and I will say that is in regards to Misery, because Kathy Bates can make anything fantastic. I think the movie Misery is just so well acted, and Kathy Bates in that movie is just like, she makes your skin crawl. So I will say in that case, I think that the movie might be better than the book, but typically I'm gonna go towards the books. I think that my problem with movies, especially when it comes to horror, is that you're seeing what someone else imagines as really horrifying, whereas when you're reading the book, you're imagining it for yourself. And so I think you come up with whatever's more horrifying to you personally in your imaginations. Number 17, name your favorite Stephen King movies. So I already said it, but I really loved Misery. Kathy Bates was phenomenal. If you haven't seen that movie for some reason, please go watch it. It, I think, is one of those movies that ages really well. Like, it's still gonna be as creepy today as it was back when it was originally shot. I mean, I know that like the film editing and stuff might be kind of cheesy for nowadays, but just the like psychological horror of it is pretty fantastic. And then I feel like I made it through this entire set of questions without like discussing the most recent book that I read by Stephen King, which was Billy Summers, that published I think 2 years ago. It was kind of a thriller, but not like a psychological thriller. It was more like a crime thriller, like escape, heist sort of a scenario. And I thought that was pretty decent. I remember it being a pretty enjoyable read, although now 2 years later, I can't actually really remember a ton of the details of the book. And number 18 is to tag some people. I'm a little bit late to this tag. I know Jess tagged me quite a few weeks back, but I was in Guatemala, and so I actually didn't have a chance to do this when it was going around. I have seen quite a few people have done it since, so I don't know who to tag, but if you've watched this and you enjoy talking about Stephen King, please consider yourself tagged. I would love to see what you have to say about it. And that's the end of this video. So if you liked it, hit the thumbs up, Comment down below and let me know, are you a Stephen King fan? What's your favorite Stephen King book? Or if you're not a fan, why not? What do you not like about his writing? And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button down below, as well as the notification bell, so that you never miss a video. And that way we can see each other again soon. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.